What is going on, everybody? I want to welcome y'all into another episode of the Philly Faithful Podcast. My name is Troy Brock. I am your host, and you can find me on socials at Troy B Baseball. You can find the pod on socials at Philly Faith Pod. Faith spelled just like Philly. And this is the one-stop shop for news, updates, and opinions on your Philadelphia Phillies. We are now in the off season. Well, we've been in the off season for a few days, honestly. But we are now in the off-season content of this Philadelphia Phillies podcast. And I don't know about y'all, but that Dodgers-Mets game last night did not make me feel any better about how the Phillies performed in their 4 games against the Mets. But we're not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about the Phillies and just what needs to happen this offseason to make the team much better and much more capable of getting to the World Series as they were expected to do this year and chase their way out of the World Series and out of the playoffs. And one of the big things, and I've harped on this a lot, especially in this show, on Twitter, everywhere I've harped on this. One of the big things is they need to upgrade at manager. There is an upgrade out there over Rob Thompson, and they need to do whatever it takes to do that, because Rob Thompson is not the guy. He has proven it time and time again. He has just he doesn't care about changing the approach. He doesn't care about actually managing and going up to guys and being like, hey, this ain't working, change it. He only cares about clubhouse vibes, and that's become very evident. And again, that's why he was a bench coach for as long as he was. And you know, as time has gone on, as I've had time to calm down from the Met series and think about things, no, the whole series loss is not on Rob Thompson. But he did play a big part in the series loss with his poor managerial moves. You know, as Lindsay and I talked about multiple times last week on the National Pod First Pitch, especially with the Phillies and just with teams in general, because it's been a running theme in this playoffs with just questionable bullpen usage. Managers can't win you a game, but managers 100% can lose you a game with bad decisions. And Rob Thompson made plenty of bad decisions. He has made plenty of bad managerial decisions in the 2.5 years that he has been the manager of the Philadelphia Phillies. And it was just on a much different level in the playoffs. It was just bad, but they definitely need to go after an upgrade for Rob Thompson, and their number one guy that they need to go after to upgrade over Rob Thompson is Skip Schumacher. He is leaving the Marlins. He's leaving from being the manager of the Marlins, so his managerial record is not all that great as far as wins and losses, but Rob Thompson's is, and we've seen how far a managerial win-loss record can get us. So ignoring the wins and losses for the manager, his moves are just sound. He knows what to do and when to do it, and that is because he is an analytically driven manager. And in 2024 and with next season 2025, analytics are the way to win baseball games. They're a thing for a reason. You win ball games with good analytics and good underlying metrics and things of that nature. And Skip Schumacher knows how to draw that out of guys and knows how to be a manager, not a vibes guy. So if the Phillies want to be serious about contending for a World Series in 2025, contending for the playoffs is one thing. Contending for a World Series is a completely different animal. And if the Phillies want to be serious about contending for a World Series in 2025, then they need to do whatever they can do to get Skip Schumacher at the helm of their team. And if they want to keep Rob Thompson on as a bench coach, cool, that's fine. There's no problem in that. That's what he's built to do. That's what he's made to do. He is not made to be a manager. And wins and losses on a managerial record are just, they're not a good metric of how a manager has performed in his career. You have to look at the moves that he makes, and the moves that Rob Thompson makes on a day in and day out basis are just not good. So if they can sit down and look at things realistically and not just be like, oh, well, he's got the best winning percentage of any Philadelphia Phillies manager in the history of the franchise, we have to keep him, then he needs to go, because that again, while he was not the main cause of the Phillies losing the series against the Mets, he was a big cause of it, and he needs to be replaced. The next thing the Phillies need to do, it's obvious. Everybody and their mama that has followed the Phillies, has followed anything having to do with the Phillies, has followed this player in any form or fashion, knows that the Phillies are one of the favorites to land this player, and it's going to cost a lot of money if they do want to land this player, but up to a certain point, it is worth it, especially with how the Phillies performed in the postseason, and that is try for Juan Soto. Don't get in a bidding war with yourself. Don't outbid yourself, but have a set stopping point and do whatever you need to do up to a point to get Juan Soto on this baseball team, because we have just seen time and time again, especially in the postseason this year, that the Phillies chase rates are just not good. And I dove into that really hard this morning, really looking at the series against the Mets specifically, and everybody wants to look at Sean Manaea's line, and I know that I touched on this last week after the game, but everybody wants to look at Sean Manaea's line in that game and think, oh, he did so good. He went 7 innings. He didn't give up any runs. He struck out X amount of batters. He only walked 2. He only hit 2. Only hit 2. That's a lot, by the way. But that if you look at the pitches themselves and how he pitched, it was not good. He did not pitch good. The Phillies helped him out tremendously. And I looked at I went to Baseball Savant and I looked at the plot of his pitches. He threw 91 pitches in that game. The Phillies swung at 53 of them. 13 of them were nowhere near the strike zone. Nowhere near. They had no business swinging at 13 of his 91 pitches. They were just very clearly balls from the moment they left his hand, and they swung anyway. Do you know what 13 free strikes accounts to? That accounts to 4 strikeouts and an 0-1 count. And if you take those 13 pitches instead of chasing them, that accounts to 3 walks and a hit by pitch, because one of those 13 pitches hit Edmundo Sosa in the back foot. It's just, it's ridiculous. And Juan Soto would help that out a lot, because he would be in the outfield. He's not going to be a designated hitter while Kyle Schwarber is on the roster. And Kyle Schwarber is on the roster for at least one more season. And Kyle Schwarber is not an issue in the slightest. He has one of the lowest chase rates on the team, which coincides with him having one of the highest walk rates in baseball, not just on the team. And he is not an issue. And surprisingly enough, Brandon Marsh is not an issue. His chase rate is pretty low, but he's not as good of a hitter as Kyle Schwarber is. So bringing Juan Soto in would give the Phillies the opportunity to either platoon Marsh and Johan Rojas in center field, because both guys are good defenders. Johan Rojas is an elite defender, and Brandon Marsh is a great defender. And so that would be a really good defensive platoon in center field, while left field and right field would be pretty poor on defense. Or it could move Brandon Marsh to the bench, start Johan Rojas every day strictly because of his glove, because you're not going to get any offensive production out of him, and bring Brandon Marsh in pitch hit situations for Johan Rojas, or for a defensive sub if you want Soto late in the game, if Juan Soto's or Nick Castellanos aren't going to hit again, especially if you intend to keep Nick Castellanos on the roster, but more on that later. Soto is currently projected to get a 14-year, $513 million contract per spot rack. That's $36.7 million per year average annual value. For the Phillies, go no higher than $40 million. You've already got a $42 million contract on the books with Zach Wheeler, and I'm not saying he's not worth it, but that's a pretty massive size contract, and go no higher than 40 million. And if you miss out on Juan Soto, spread the love out among some other free agents and fix some other issues in the roster if you can't get Juan Soto. And there are other issues on the roster, and we will get to that momentarily. But Juan Soto, it would be a big piece because he doesn't chase. He's one of the best hitters in baseball, period. Like he doesn't put up the home runs that Soto, I'm sorry, he is Soto. He doesn't put up the home runs that Ohtani or Judge does on a year in, year out basis, but that's fine. Hitting home runs doesn't mean you're a good hitter. And I'm not saying Ohtani or Judge aren't good hitters, but hitting home runs alone does not make you a good hitter. Cedric Mullins hit 30 home runs a few years ago. He's not a good hitter. But Juan Soto, as far as an all-around hitter, contact, power, discipline, all of the above, Juan Soto is, if he's not the best, he's top 3, and he ain't 3. So he needs to be a key addition to the roster. And yes, every team is going to say they want to add Juan Soto to their roster. They would be just, especially at least every contending team is going to say they want to add Juan Soto to their roster, and they would be lying if they said they didn't want to add Juan Soto to their roster, because again, he is one of, if not the best all-around hitters in the game today, and he has proven that year in and year out ever since he debuted. And he is going to get paid in free agency, and as long as it's less than $40 million a year, which it most likely won't be, then it needs to be the Phillies, unless they can get rid of some of their other contracts that they have on the books. And Lindsay and I talked about that on the national show First Pitch last week about, I think it was Thursday. We talked a little bit about some of the contracts that the Phillies have on the books, and guys have not lived up to them with, for example, Taijuan Walker making $18 million a year. That was a bad signing before the ink dried. Nick Castellanos making $20 million a year. He has not lived up to that in the slightest. Trey Turner making $27 million a year. He has not lived up to that in the slightest. I don't care what his surface numbers say. When you look under the hood, he is not a good hitter. He got very, very lucky this year with his surface numbers, and his season should have looked more like it did last year than it did this year. And he is just atrocious defensively at shortstop, and there's no question about that. But just and there's 8 contracts on the Phillies payroll right now of $18 million or more dollars, from Taijuan Walker at 18 to Zach Wheeler at 42, and that's a lot of money to be paying, especially when at least 3 of those 8 aren't living up to the contracts that they are being paid. And it's just it's not a good place the Phillies. It's really not a good place the Phillies find themselves in right now. But again, signing Juan Soto could help alleviate a lot of that and add a big piece to the top of their lineup, and would hopefully open their eyes and make them move Trey Turner down in the lineup, because he should not be batting second. But we'll talk about that more later in the offseason. Next, they need to make sure that Andrew Painter is ready and healthy for spring training. He pitched in the Arizona Fall League on Saturday. He threw 29 pitches over 2 innings. He touched 100 miles per hour, and he is a legitimate candidate for a rotation spot in 2025. We have been told for years now that Andrew Painter is the guy, the pitching prospect in baseball, not just in the Phillies farm system, but in baseball. And he's finally getting healthy, and that is a very good sign for the Phillies. But they need to make sure that he stays healthy throughout the rest of the offseason and can be ready for spring training, and don't overwork him. Put him on a pitch limit, put him on whatever needs to be done to keep him healthy. Don't expect him to qualify for the ERA title in 2025 if he does start the season on the major league roster. But he should start the season on the major league roster, because he cannot be much worse than Taijuan Walker or the majority of the other pitchers that pitched in the 5 spot in the rotation in 2024. So make sure Andrew Painter is healthy, and make sure he is ready for spring training. That is a big, big, big key for the Phillies this offseason to help their pitching staff tremendously. Try to find a sucker for Taijuan Walker's contract when the only untouchable prospects being Andrew Painter and Aiden Miller. Like I said earlier, Walker is making $18 million a year. He's made 36 so far because he's played for the Phillies for 2 years. And guess what? He's under contract for 2 more years. That was not a good contract since before the ink was dry. That was a bad contract, period. He has never been a good pitcher as a whole. He's had 2 decent seasons, and both of them came in contract years. So, and other than that, he's been mediocre to bad. And in 2024, he was worse than Patrick Corbin in 2024, to put it in that kind of perspective. But it's just, you got to find a way to get rid of that contract, because not only does that make your team better by getting him off the team, but it also frees up $18 million a year over the next 2 years that you can put towards more free agents like Juan Soto or a couple of the guys that we're going to talk about coming up. And they never should have signed Taijuan Walker ever. And I said this from the moment the pen was put to paper. They never should have signed him. This is not hindsight 2020. They had recency bias over a good contract year and said, okay, we'll ignore all of your other mediocre to really bad years. Here's $18 million a year for 4 years. And it's not worked out, and he needs to not be on the roster anymore, and his salary needs to not be on the payroll. Maybe you can package Walker with Justin Crawford and Starlin Caba and get Walker off the payroll in a deal with them, and hopefully not eat much, if any, up Walker's contract, but find a way to get him off the roster and off the payroll. As long as Aiden Miller and Andrew Painter stay in the farm system, anybody else can go with him. Attack free agency with a purpose. Kind of with the Taijuan Walker signing, Nick Castellanos, Trey Turner. Don't just sign big names because they're big names. That's obviously doesn't always work. Don't go out and sign Kenley Jansen or Joe Kelly just because they're free agent relievers and you think that you need to improve your bullpen. And these guys are big names. They're well known. That doesn't mean they're good. Kenley Jansen has, while he's not been bad, he's not been the same Kenley Jansen for years now. He's very, very old. He's very, very injury prone. And Joe Kelly is not good at all. And he's a bad presence in the clubhouse. You don't want that in the clubhouse, and you don't want his inconsistent command and just control over his pitches in your bullpen. It's just neither of those guys deserve to be paid what they're going to make, especially at their ages and with their abilities. They've got to re-sign Jeff Hoffman. Jeff Hoffman was misused in the postseason. It was the bad appearances that he had were not on him; they were on Rob Thompson. But Carlos Estevez, he can move on. Don't try to re-sign Carlos Estevez. He showed in the regular season and the postseason that trade did not work. Was not a good trade, and we'll dive more into that on a later episode. But he's not the guy. He was brought in to be the closer, and in closing situations, he crumbles essentially on a contending team. He might have done well in that role on a non-contending team where he doesn't have much pressure to save games because they're not saving the game, doesn't give them another win and make them closer to the playoffs. But he's not that guy on a contending team. Maybe the back end of the bullpen, but he's another guy that's not worth what he's going to be paid to be a closer somewhere. If you don't sign Juan Soto, look to guys like Teoscar Hernandez and Anthony Santander, because they are more than viable options as backups if you don't get Juan Soto, especially Teoscar Hernandez, who is still playing for the Dodgers in the playoffs. Both of those guys can play left field, which is an area of need, a corner outfield spot in general, not just left field, but a corner outfield spot because, hopefully Nick Castellanos can be moved also. But you have to go with a purpose into free agency, and you also need to not sign a starting pitcher because starting pitching is fine. None of the names that are available in free agency as far as starting pitching goes are cheap enough to be viable options for a fifth starting pitcher. So you don't have to improve your rotation. The starting rotation was not an issue for the team in the postseason, in the regular season, outside of the number 5 spot, and Andrew Painter is most likely going to be in that spot. So you do not have to sign a starting pitcher just because there are a lot of big name starting pitchers on the free agent market. Yes, it would be cool to bring Corbin Burns in. It would be cool if Blake Snell or Garrett Cole opted out of their contracts to bring those guys in. But just because they're there doesn't mean you have to sign them. Look into a trade of Alec Bohm. This was a big one for me because I was really getting behind Alec Bohm this season. The temper tantrums and his post-game comments the other day kind of sealed the deal for me on Alec Bohm. The temper tantrums I could have dealt with, but when he said, "Oh, I know where I'm going to be next season," that kind of that's not a good look, bro. You can't be that assured of yourself. Yes, you improved at the plate offensively in the regular season, and yes, he improved defensively, but he gets in his head too much. He has those temper tantrums very often, and it's not a good. He's not a good fit for the clubhouse as a whole. He's 28 years old. He should not be having temper tantrums like that. And you could get a good return, for a decent return. I mean, you're not going to get a top tier return, but you could get a decent return for a guy like Alec Bohm, who still has 2 years of team control, I believe. So you got to find a trade partner for Alec Bohm, and that would open up third base to a guy like another free agent, Alex Bregman. Offensively, it's not that much of a drop off from Alec Bohm, and he does not strike out. He generally walks more than he strikes out, so that is an improvement. Which Alec Bohm doesn't strike out much, but he strikes out more than he walks. And the glove would be a tremendous improvement, and that would help amazingly for guys like Ranger Suarez and Christopher Sanchez, who are ground ball pitchers. So you gotta look for a trade of Bohm and then try to bring in Bregman to improve not only the lineup but the defensive alignment and the defensive ability of your team as a whole. Because if you have Bregman at third base, your infield would be Bryce Harper, Bryson Stott, Trey Turner, and Alec Bregman. 3 of those guys are Gold Glove caliber defenders, and 1 is Trey Turner. So that is a pretty solid defensive alignment for your infield, and it, again, would help guys like Ranger Suarez and Christopher Sanchez out a lot. Finally, this offseason, the Phillies need to find a viable backup catcher with plans for JT's role to diminish with his age. It is becoming very evident that JT Realmuto is not the same player at the plate that he once was. The defense is still there. It's hard for defense to diminish, especially at a position that does not involve too much movement. But he had knee surgery in May, and he's a catcher. He cannot be catching 4 or 5 games in a row anymore before getting an off day. They'll have to start giving him the first 2 games of a series, and then in the day game, putting in the backup, getting the backup more reps. And with that being the case, while Garrett Stubbs is a great leader and a great person to have in the clubhouse, he's not really a viable option to be a backup catcher that is getting an increased role in the lineup and in the team. So you would need to find a guy that is viable of doing that offensively and defensively. Guys like Danny Jansen, Austin Hedges, or Kyle Higashioka, bring in one of those three to be a backup catcher to JT Realmuto. And JT Realmuto's last year of his contract is next season. Whoever you bring in, like if it is Kyle Higashioka, sign him for a couple years. Tell him, hey, you're going to be the backup to JT this year, but next year you'll be the starter. And follow through on it, of course. Don't lie to him. But Kyle Higashioka would be a fantastic backup catcher behind JT Realmuto. And that's pretty much what the Phillies should do this offseason. That's a lot of things that they should and need to do this offseason. We'll get into more over the offseason because it's a long time till baseball again for the Phillies, and we've got a lot of podcasts to do between now and then. But just this offseason, I'll do a team breakdown, a positional breakdown. We'll break down how the team as a whole did statistically compared to the league and how each position did, and a lineup breakdown, what the ideal lineup should be, just going off of the guys that started every day in 2024. Free agency breakdown, going forward, who goes where, things of that nature, who the Phillies sign, financial breakdown, look at the payroll and what needs to happen, what doesn't need to happen. Some Learn to Baseball Better episodes. That is a big, big thing for me, is trying to get people to learn to baseball better, because there are still people out there who think batting average is important as a indicator of whether or not a player is good. And if you were one of those people, I want to break it to you right now that Luis Arias is not a good player. I don't care how many batting titles he wins in a row. I don't care how high his batting average is. He does nothing else but hit singles. Being a singles merchant does not make you a good player. And then we'll have some guests on throughout the offseason. So be looking out for those. We'll be doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes in the offseason unless there's big news, unless the Phillies sign Garrett Cole or Juan Soto, then and it's on a day where I don't normally have an episode, we'll throw an episode up for that. But that is what we're looking at. The regular schedule in the offseason will be Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So make sure you hit that follow button on your podcast service of choice. Give us a 5-star rating on one of those. It helps us tremendously. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave a like, leave a comment, and hit that subscribe button so you can be notified when more episodes just like this go live. Take a look for the national podcast First Pitch IBPN on your podcast service of choice or YouTube. I am on there pretty frequently with Lindsey Crosby and Christian Rao talking about baseball on a national level. So go check that out. And you can find me on Twitter at Troy B Baseball. You can find the pod on Twitter at Philly Faith Pod. Faith spelled with a PH, just like Philly. And until the next time, I've been Troy. You've been awesome. Peace, love, and rock and roll. I'm out. Rock and roll. Bye.